largely what people know. So the organizers will call them in. Was it possible to understand me when I was introducing the envelope?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. How long do I have? Do I have a chance to recompile my file or not?
Yes.
No, I mean, okay. Escape. Okay. Okay. No, I have to. Okay.
So our second speaker this morning is Philippe Michel from EPFL Lausanne, who will discuss his updated version of applications of trace functions in analytic number theory.
Okay, so thank you very much. I am really deeply honored to give this talk today for Peter's birthday conference. So there has been so far plain evidence that Peter is really a great man, and it's so okay. There is very little I can add to this. Okay, so so 11 years ago, I was also giving a talk for Nick Katz's 60th birthday conference. I think it was there too. And so, in a sense, this talk is a sort of a mixed between Nick's interest and Peter's interest. So I hope both will appreciate. And this is a joint work with a lot of people. So in recent years, my number of collaborators has increased steadily. So a few years ago, my maximum was I had paper with 4 people or 3 other people, and now it goes up to 10. So it will look like physics papers and so on. Okay, so so Peter's work has always had a deep influence on me and my research and my interest, and this talk is also a manifestation of this, although it's a bit slightly indirect, so we would see. But so, okay, I start with the following lovely theorem, so the so-called the equidistribution of Ecke points. So you take the closed geodesic, the closed horizontal geodesic in the fundamental domain, which is of 8, 1 over Q. So in this talk, Q will almost always be a prime. And then you consider the points. Horocycle. What did I say? Okay. And so then you can take the integral points of this horocycle, which is the main part of the Eke orbit of the Q Eke operator. And okay, if you start from the point I say, so the theorem is when Q goes to infinity, this discrete set of points become equidistributed on the modular surface for the hyperbolic measure. And so Peter had proposed a refinement to this theorem in the context of very general conjecture, which he called the Möbius disjointness for zero entropy flows. And so in this special context, his conjecture is the fact that now you have your integral Eke points, and what you do is you just pick the integral points which are primes. So the conjecture is, again, if you take all the prime less than Q and let Q go to infinity, this set of points will become equidistributed on the modular surface. And so this is a beautiful and very catchy problem. And so here has some instance. So here you see when Q is 61, you have this picture. So I'm not sure this picture is representative of Peter's activity, so maybe it's representative of my activity. So here is more like what should be Peter, or even this. So in these drawings, the blue points are the prime Eke points, I would say, and the other ones are the regular integral Eke points with no constraints. And so then you see that the prime Eke point indeed seems to become dense on the modular surface. So this conjecture was studied by Sarnak and Adrian Ubis, and they, in a beautiful paper, they obtained very striking results and very difficult results in direction of this. So one result among others, so this theorem is conditional to the Ramanujan-Peterson, but okay, it's not that important. And what they proved is that any weak star limit of this prime Eke orbit contains a big portion, a big positive proportion of the hyperbolic measure, and is not has no concentration at all. So it's really continuous, absolutely continuous with respect to the hyperbolic measure. So it's something very strong. There are, I should mention, there are also unconditional results which are a bit weaker, but so, okay. And, okay, so when I saw this, really it's a problem which is irresistible. So it's a very nice theorem, also because it is incomplete. And so then you just want to improve or even possibly prove the theorem. So at that time, when I was aware of this paper, Fouvry was visiting, and the next day, Emmanuel Kowalski also was in Lausanne. So we looked a bit at it, and so made some computation, decomposed the prime combinatorially, and did classical stuff, and we arrived at some of that shape, something very funny. So you want to evaluate your Eke points against a modular form. So you pick Eke eigenform with Fourier with Eke eigenvalue lambda f of n, and you have this sum of length n, which you so you evaluate this Eke eigenvalue against normalized Klosterman sums. So these are the standard Klosterman sum divided by square root of Q, so they are of bounded size. And the goal was to prove that you have some non-trivial cancellation in that sum. And it was great because we were able to do it. So really, we were very happy until, and for this, maybe I'm very grateful to Brian to recalling to the world that I could mess up a computation by a factor 2. In fact, I'm capable for much more. And so I made, in fact, doing this derivation, I made a big mistake in computing, so I don't even remember what I did. But what happens is that this sum, in fact, at least does not seem to play a direct role in resolving Peter's conjecture. So maybe someday it will, but it's not so straightforward. And OK, so when you face a failure, you face a problem which is very hard, you have two options. So one is that you try harder. The other option is that you decide that that this problem, after all, is not that interesting, and it's much better to pursue with what you are capable to do. So this is, we choose the conservative route. And so we looked at further at, start at these sums. And OK, so even it has no connections to, or no direct connections to Peter's problem, nevertheless, it has an interpretation in terms of equidistribution. So if you consider this Weil sum, which is here, so here what you do is you average your integral equipoints against the function f, but you also put a weight, and this weight is not a characteristic function of the prime, but it's an algebraic function. It's exponential 2 pi I over q times minus the multiplicative inverse of n modulo q. And so what this bound gives, so the fact that this sum has some cancellation show that this average tends to 0. So that's very simple. You just do the Fourier expansion and you switch the sums. And you remark that the Klosterman sum is the Fourier transform of this weight function. So what this sum tells you is that if you consider the sign measure, which has total variation 1, and which is supported at the equipoint and weighted by this sort of funny algebraic factor, then this sign measure converges to 0. And OK, in fact, such statement, equidistribution problem for orocycles, which you decorate with some weights, there were existing instances earlier. So one possibility is to look for equidistribution of short orocycles. So then your weight is something shorter than the characteristic function of the unit interval. So there are, and another possibility of weighting which is interesting is when you weight your equipoint with the Legendre symbol. So or in other, so then the cancellation of my original sum is equivalent to a subconvex bound for the L function of f twisted by this Legendre symbol. So, and it's really equivalent. So then you have an equidistribution statement, namely you consider your integral equipoint, but you impose on them to be quadratic residues, so you take only half of the points, and still you are equidistributed. Okay, so here are examples. So the blue squares represent quadratic residues, and the white square are general points. Okay, so you see it looks equidistributed, even though you have only half of the points. Okay, and so so because at least we had two cases that we could do, so we say, can we do more? And what is the most general class of weight that we want to put into such problems? And in fact, so the widest possible class which is available by the method we use is the so-called trace function. So I want to say this. So I was scheduled in the same session as Werner Müller. So maybe it was a misunderstanding about the title, because my title included trace. The trace functions are considered are so-called Frobenius trace function. These are the functions which are given by taking the trace of the Frobenius endomorphism on a constructible L-adic sheaf on the affine line over FQ. So for purpose of normalization, one take a sheaf which is a middle extension, which is the nicest way to extend the sheaf outside the Lie locus. And equivalently, such a sheaf corresponds to a representation of the Galois group of the affine line. And what we request about this sheaf is that it is pure of weight 0 at each place where it is Lie. And automatically, by Deligne, it implies that it will be mixed of weight less than 0 at any possible place. And as a consequence of this, the trace function, so the trace of the Frobenius endomorphism, is bounded in absolute value by the dimension of the space of the representation. So I'm asking this, which is just to say that the function I consider will be bounded, and so if the rank is bounded, and also I'm asking that the sheaf is, or equivalently, the representation is geometrically irreducible, which means it remains irreducible when you restrict it to the geometric Galois group. In fact, so when you want to deal with the most general cases, it's better to take a sheaf which is geometrically isotypic, but so it will simplify slightly the statement if I assume they are irreducible, and there is no big difference. Okay, so, and so then to such a function, or rather to such a sheaf, is associated an integer, which we call the conductor, and which is a measure of how the representation is complicated. So it has to do, so it's not exactly the Artin conductor, because you can have representation of very large rank with a very small Artin conductor. So in our definition of the conductor, so there are contributions from the ramification place of the representation, but also you add the rank into it. So now, when you have this trace function defined as a trace of Frobenius, so it's a function of the FQ point of the affine line, and which is Z modulo QZ, and then it defines an arithmetic function on the integers, which I will still note F. And so then you have I would say, an arithmetic function living in characteristic 0, and which you want, so you want to study versus other natural arithmetic functions, but which come from elsewhere. And so what one will do is, so we will look at what happens when the prime Q goes to infinity. So we will look at the trace function whose complexity, whose conductor remains bounded while the Q goes to infinity. So that's really necessary. So for these methods, there are cases where it's very interesting to investigate trace function with growing conductors. So like you have this problem about Hilbert sums, which are very, but so we don't do this here. And okay, so some examples of trace functions. So the simplest examples are the additive character. So they are trace functions and associated to the Artin-Schreier sheaf. Multiplicative, so Dirichlet characters modulo Q. And their associated sheaf is called the Kummer sheaf. And you also have, of course, the Klosterman sums, so which we normalize by power of a square root of, it's Q, P is Q here. So that these Klosterman sums are bounded and are bounded in absolute value by this integer k. Okay, and it's not really a trace function, but it's anyway it occurs. And okay, so even it's as a sheaf interpretation, but we will also need the Dirac function at one point over FQ. I just normalize this Dirac function by Q to the 1/2, so it's to have a sort of L2 normalization. So that the L2 norm of this function becomes Q, which would be also typically the L2 norm of a general trace function. So it's just a normalization, but which is useful when looking for general formulas. So these are basic objects. And what happens is that you have a standard procedure to construct a trace function, a new trace function out of old ones, which correspond to natural operation on functions. So one is to take the pullback. So you have, suppose you have a map between, so from and to the projective line, then you can form the function which is big F composed with little f. And it happens, if big F is a trace function, the pullback is very often also a trace function. It may not be irreducible, but it's not one that is not very far from it. So what happens at the level of representation corresponds to restricting the Galois representation to a finite index subgroup. So it's not very bad. So you have, of course, the dual operation, so taking a complex conjugate, which correspond to taking the dual Galois representation. You can do tensor products. You can do products of function, which is tensor products of sheaves. And there is something much more, much deeper and much trickier, which is taking the push forward. So that is, you have a map from an algebraic variety equipped with a sheaf to the affine line. And okay, and so, or you have a function on this algebraic variety. And so what you do is that you consider a point on the affine line and you sum your function over the fiber of the point. And okay, and so you want to have things which are bounded. So what you can usually do is normalize the sum by some power against P is Q. So okay, I'm more and more willing to recompile my text file, but I will resist. Okay, but this is even, so this is even this with this normalization, this is something very naive, because at the level of sheaves, so even if you have something relatively nice on why what you get by taking the push forward will not be in general a sheaf, but rather a complex of sheaves. And okay, so that's the push forward is not very, but there are at least two situations where the push forward operation is very, very nice. And this is due to the work of Deligne, Lomont, and Katz. So one example is the operation of taking the Fourier transform of the function against some additive character. And if the sheaf is nice, meaning that it is not, in that case, a Nartin-Schreier sheaf, then it has a nice, so the Fourier transform has a nice sheaf incarnation, which Katz called, in that case, the naive Fourier transform, because it reduced to a single sheaf instead of a complex. And the second operation, which is also a push forward, is a multiplicative convolution of two functions. And here again, when the two sheaves are nice, and here it's just simply asking for this sheaf not to be Kummer sheaves, then the multiplicative convolution is a nice trace function. Okay, so why I say this is by these operations, they occur in analytic number theory, and so it's very good that we have so our trace functions are stable under these very natural operations. Okay, so the most important result about trace functions is Deligne main theorem from Weil 2, which measure how two trace functions correlate. And so what happens is that if you take the inner product of two trace functions, if the two trace functions are the same, you would get something of size about Q, which is the size of the finite field, plus an error term. And if the two functions are not the same or are not proportional, then you should get something smaller. And in fact, what you get by Deligne is a very big cancellation, which is you get square root of Q instead of Q. And okay, so and in this estimate, so the size of the error term also depends on the conductor of the trace function. So that's why it's good to impose that these conductors are bounded and when Q grows. And so one consequence of Deligne theorem is that if Q is sufficiently large compared to the conductor, the trace function determines the L-adic sheaf. Okay, so great. So okay, I will need some other objects which are natural. Okay, so we are looking on function or on the affine line or on the projective line, and so the PGL2 acts on the projective line by fractional linear transformation, and so by pullback, it acts on functions and on trace functions, because PGL2 acts by automorphism. So, and okay, now if you want to see how, so let's apply Deligne's correlation theorem, I would say, when you take a trace function and the second trace function is a transform of the initial one by one of these fractional linear transformation. Then what you have to know is whether the two sheaves are geometrically isomorphic or not by Deligne theorem. So yeah, here this thing means that the two geometric representations are isomorphic. And so then you introduce the group of automorphism of geometric automorphism of the sheaves, which are the fractional linear transformation, which send the sheaf to itself, so in the geometric isomorphism class. So this automorphism group is an algebraic group, and we will be interested by its FQ points. And what is very important, which follow from the classification of finite groups in characteristic in PGL2 of FQ, is that this group of automorphism is either of order less than 60, or it's contained in the normalizer of maximal torus, or P divides the order. And if P divides the order, and if, it's Q, again it's Q, sorry, and if Q is sufficiently large compared to the conductor, what happens is that if the group has an element of order P, then the sheaf will be a pullback of an Artin-Schreier sheaf. And then the group of automorphism will be a conjugate of the unipotent group of upper triangular matrices. So that's a sort of rigidity result, which is not very hard, but which is very useful. And so let me spell a consequence of the previous lemma, is that we will use, is that if the sheaf is not a tensor product of an Artin-Schreier sheaf and a Kummer sheaf, then if you intersect its group of automorphism with the Borel subgroup, then the intersection has bounded size. Has bounded size. Okay. So now I will. So these are the basics that you can extract from reading, from opening various orange boxes provided by Nick Katz. Okay, what trace function do you have a chance to meet when doing analytic number theory? You have the obvious one, which are the characters, additive or multiplicative. You have the Dirac distribution, which is important to count functions in arithmetic progressions. Something which are less obvious are Klosterman sums, which come from the Peterson-Kuznetsov formula, and more generally, in the geometric side of many versions of trace formulas, you have, say, integral, q-adic integral, which may reduce to finite sums over Fp, and which are often.
Maybe the organizers went better.
Sorry? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but so yeah, yeah. No, yeah. So okay, so you have deep trace functions in the trace formula too. Yeah. And okay, but I will continue with something much more elementary, so which have to do with what we do when we perform analytic number theory. So first, you have the Poisson summation formula. So suppose, so here it's not a sharp, let's say, it's not a sharp summation over an interval. You should rather interpret it as a smooth summation of a variable of size, say, big X, and you sum your trace function, say, over an interval of length X, smoothly. And the Poisson summation formula tells you that it transforms this sum into another sum of, say, of dual length, which will be Q over X, and involving now the Fourier transform of your initial function. So, as normalized as I said. So you can do Poisson formula, but you could iterate Poisson formula. So and when you iterate Poisson formula, so then you are doing Voronoi summation formula, or you are doing also the Ecke-Godman functional equation for automorphic L function twisted by characters. So just if you do this for a divisor function, a k-divisor function, so you replace the k-divisor function by the product of the factors of n, or the possible product, and then you apply a k-time Poisson summation formula on each on this variable, and then you get a dual sum which has a dual length, q to the k over x, with a size factor, and the transform that you get on the other side kind of generalize the Fourier transform. It's the sum, so it's a correlation function of your initial trace function against a multiplicatively shifted Klosterman sum of higher order. So, for instance, what is very important in the work of Rudnick, Luo, and Sarnak is that when your trace function f, when your trace function f is the Dirac function, you get pure Klosterman sums, and then you are happy because you have a Deligne bound, and then you have good bounds for Ecke eigenvalues and Laplace eigenvalues. Okay, so that's in practice. So that's why we will see. You see very often Klosterman sums. When you apply a Poisson or a multi-Poisson to a Dirac function, you get Klosterman sums. But okay, you can imagine more complicated things. And again, this is not limited to the divisor function. If you take the Fourier coefficient of JL K automorphic form, you get something very similar with a very similar transform. So there may be a little twist, but nothing very important. And a nice way to prove this when Q, the modulus is prime, is by the Ecke-Godman functional equation. I think you noticed this. But anyway, so other transformations that you may have are you may do Cauchy-Schwarz, or even if you are risky older. And then what happens often is you have to sum products of shifts of your trace function. So here you have, say I have applied the older with exponent 2p, so p is now in regular integer. And then you get a product of 2p trace function with some shifts by some transformation. And then usually what you want to know if this sum is small, is of size square root of q. And for this, you have to determine whether your tensor product sheaf contains the trivial representation or not. And for this, so Katz has furnished a very powerful technique based on the knowledge of the geometric monodromy group. So sometimes it's not necessary to know all the monodromy group, but or just the ramification may be sufficient. But okay, so that's what you can also have, and there are techniques available to deal with these sums. Okay, so when did I start? At 20? 15, okay. So now we will perform analytic number theory. And so the most basic one is to investigate how trace function correlate against a characteristic function of an interval of length shorter than Q. And for this, you have the Polya-Vinogradov method, which is trivial, which is an application of Poisson summation formula, which tells you that if the sheaf is not an Artin-Schreier sheaf, so it's not, if the function basically is not an additive character, then the function over an interval of length summed over an interval of length x is bounded by square root of q times log q. So, which means that, the sum is bounded non-trivially when x is a bit larger than, q to the 1/2 times log q. And so then it's very useful when you have to average a trace function over a relatively long interval, so of long greater than square root of q. And the proof is trivial. You apply the Plancherel formula, which so this sum is the inner product of f with the characteristic function of the interval. So you do Plancherel, then you know that your Fourier transform is a trace function, so it is bounded in terms of the initial conductor, and then you look at the L1 norm of the Fourier transform of the characteristic function of the interval, and it's bounded by square root of q times log q. So that's very easy. And okay, so and one really great challenge which would unlock a lot of problems in analytic number theory is to improve this bound, or more precisely, you are happy if you are able to get non-trivial bounds for x which are smaller than square root of q log q. And this is done in very, very special cases. So when your trace function is a multiplicative character or an additive, okay, not a multiplicative character or a multiplicative character times an additive polynomial phase by works of Burgess and many other people. There is a very recent paper by Peirce and Isbron, Lillian Peirce and Isbron, which so does something like this too, and it's very cute, but it's very limited. And so what we would like is to have to beat Polya-Vinogradov for more general trace function. So again, so now it's a paper with 6 people. So so we have just a very, very modest general improvement over Polya-Vinogradov. So where the term factor log q, so it's with Fouvry, Emmanuel Kowalski, Raju, Riva, and Sundararajan. Raju is a student of Kannan Sundararajan. And so the factor log q is replaced by log of x over square root of q. So basically, what it says is that you have a tiny, you make a tiny saving as long as x is greater than square root of q. So you bridge a small gap of log q. Okay. Okay, so we want more in general. So the other type of sum that you usually meet are the type 2 sums of trace functions, which are bilinear sums of f evaluated at the split quadratic form Mn against general coefficients. And here is a trivial bound by just Cauchy-Schwarz. And so that's, and the technique is relatively standard, but here is a consequence of Polya-Vinogradov and a bit of algebraic geometry, that one has this general bound as long as the sheaf is not the tensor product of the Kummer sheaf and an Artin-Schreier sheaf, and which is a bound which improves over the trivial bound by as long as one variable is not too small and the other variable is a bit larger than square root of q. And so again, the proof is not very difficult, but starts to be a bit more involved. So what you do is you do Cauchy-Schwarz. So then you have a sum of a product of trace function over an interval. So you do Polya-Vinogradov. It leads you to this sum. So it's and And then you evaluate this sum by taking the Fourier transform, by doing Plancherel. And what you get is a correlation sum between the Fourier transform of f and a shift of this Fourier transform by this upper triangular matrix. And so what you know is that this sum is small unless this matrix is in the geometric, in the group of automorphism of the Fourier transform. And so because of our hypothesis, what happens is that we can apply the lemma that I mentioned earlier, and it states that this intersection is bounded. So, of course, it can never be 0 because you will always have the identity in the intersection. So, but it's bounded, and then it shows that the sum you are interested in are small for all but finitely bounded value, number of value of the ratio M1 over M2. So the typical ratio that you could have is M1 over M2 is 1, which corresponds to the diagonal. So you might have extra diagonals to count, but a bounded number. And then it proves this general thing. So this is not at all mysterious. So this has been used for ages for special trace functions. So the good thing is that now you can do this without even thinking about what trace function you have. So it's just easy to use result. There is a very cute result, very recent result that I want to quote by two young guys. So Xiping, who was more or less a PhD student of mine, and Will Sawin, which is so PhD student of FNICATS. And so it's a general large sieve inequality for trace functions. So you have this bilinear sum, and for which you have arbitrary coefficients. And if you assume that your sheaf is not a Kummer sheaf, that is, your function is not a multiplicative character, then you have this bound. And you see this bound improves over the trivial bound as soon as the product of the two variables is greater than Q. So that's something which is completely general, which should be very useful. And so the proof, it's an application of Katz's theory of multiplicative convolution. So you have to control the spectrum of matrix, and to control the spectrum, you look at the high powers of each matrix, and the entries of these high powers are convolutions. And then you have Katz's theory to help you. So there is some work to do, but I think it's something which will be useful and which is worth knowing. Okay, so I will return to my initial problem, and so here is one general statement. So if you have a trace function which is not an additive character, and you have f any Ecker eigenform, then the sum, so x is less than q, then your sum exhibits some cancellation, at least as long as x is a little bigger than q to the 1 minus 1 over 16. So if if x is close to q, you get some non-trivial saving. And now, if you do the Fourier expansion of modular form, you deduce out of it an equidistribution theorem for Ecker point weighted by, in fact, the Fourier transform of, so from here to there, the operation is to take the Fourier transform. Okay. And so let me give an brief idea about the proof. It's so when the trace function is a multiplicative character, so I already said the the bound is a subconvex bound for a twisted L function, and there are various ways to prove such a bound. And one way, so basically they are by amplification, and one possibility, and most proof amplifies the Dirichlet character amongst all characters. And to perform amplification, you use the fact that your character is a character that is quasi-invariant under multiplication. So if f is not a character, you cannot do this because you don't have a multiplicative invariance. And instead, so we used an alternative proof, which is due to Bykovsky, which has a sort of strange idea to amplify the modular form. So it's not the f that, so the f will be fixed basically, but the modular form will be taken in a family, and the family you take is the family of modular forms of level q or 1 or q, and so they contain the form you want. And here, in a sense, you take advantage of the fact that you have a conductor dropping phenomenon that say if you take a modular form of level 1 or of level q and you twist then by a character of conductor q, the twist will always be of conductor q square. So, and that's what makes it possible to do this amplification in the end. And okay, so there is a method, standard methods, and so on. And what you arrive at the end is that your amplifier produces some integral, some matrix, invertible matrix with integral entries, and you arrive at correlation sums for your Fourier transform. So the Fourier transform, and you look at its correlation with the pullback of itself by this matrix coming from amplification. And so the game is to show that these correlation sums are often small, unless, say, Q is the identity. What do you want in the end by Deligne is that your matrix modulo Q not be contained into this group of automorphism. And then the fact that this group of automorphism is not very big, I say, so the hardest case is when it's of size about the normalizer of a torus. So you can manage to show that your correlation matrix do not fall too often into your automorphism group. And for this, you have to use methods from analytic number theory, so it's not purely in characteristic Q, so you have to use Linux basic lemma that was mentioned earlier by Zev, I think, yeah. And repulsion arguments. Okay, I just want to stress one special, it's an over or, okay, just want to stress a special case of this is when the modular form is the Eisenstein series. So it's very special. You have all the mass forms, but the one which is the most useful is the case of Eisenstein series. So meaning that you have cancellation of a trace function against the standard divisor function, or in fact better, when you have cancellation when you evaluate a trace function against the product of integers, and you perform a smooth summation over these integers. And so what happened is that this sum exhibit cancellation as soon as the product of the size of this integer is of at least q to the 1 minus 1 over 8. So in particular, if you take m and n of size q to the 1/2 minus 1 over 16, then you get some cancellation. And 1/2 minus 1 over 16, it's below the Polya-Vinogradov range. So you have now a general theorem beating Polya-Vinogradov. For this, you need to have a double summation, but so the fact that and it's valid for very, very general trace functions. And so this theorem is responsible for much of the application that I wanted to spell out. So trace function versus primes, primes in arithmetic progressions to large moduli, so which is Polymath 8. So one portion of Polymath 8 project. So where we use the Q-van der Korput method, the double Q-van, okay, and application to the fourth moment of Dirichlet function. So this is one slide that Brian did not show in his lecture, so I think it's doing justice to Matt Young, at least to show his paper evaluating the fourth moment of Dirichlet functions, and so which is so the average of fourth power of Dirichlet function. And so what we had recently with the two same guy plus Valentin Blomer and George Milicevic is a further quite a significant improvement over Matt's error term, so from 5 over, okay, something like this, over 1 over 32. And all this use developments of techniques coming from the general treatment of trace, analytic treatment of trace functions. So we have another one, you see, so what, did I add something? Yeah, I wanted to mention, so I'm over now, but so many of these things, you can get them, I said, by reading carefully and truthfully, so SGF 4.5 and all the books of Katz. And in this, you have incredible material which cover a lot of what you need to do great analytic number theory. But now you want to push things further, and now we start to meet problems which are not in Katz's book. So so there is a great young guy, so that I told already, so Will Savin, which has been lured into this business, and which we can exploit without mercy. And so then we have start to have really funny things going on when now what you want to do is you want to evaluate products of trace function, but now depending on two parameters. And what you want to get is, instead of getting a square root of Q, you want to get a Q, so which is the full square root cancellation. And that's so now, so I'm more or less the scribe of him. So I learn a lot about so the K things, these are the vanishing cycles and so on, which is really the big thing when you want to start to go in 2-dimension and to learn the linear Katz also. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes, so maybe 10 or more, yeah. And
can you say, just like 20 seconds, what it has to do with polymath?
Oh, okay. So it's so in Zhang theorem, the key ingredients of Zhang's method is Bombieri. So Bombieri-Vinogradov theorem beyond 1/2 for smooth moduli. And so to deal with this, so you follow the tracks of Fouvry, Bombieri, Friedlander, Iwaniec. So you use the dispersion method, and when you analyze the the arithmetic progression, you stumble on sums of exponential sums. And so specifically for this polymath thing, because Q was a smooth modulus, so then to beat, say, the Polya-Vinogradov curse, what Zhang used and what we used is Q van der Corput method. And so then our input with Emmanuel in this was to formalize what you need for a general sheaf for the Q van der Corput method to work. So it's somewhere there. So this is a kind of very simple, okay, here is a result. You can do Q van der Corput if your trace functions are not quadratic phases. And there are more general theorems, and we have other inputs with, and you need these results for general trace function because in the analysis you meet higher order Klosterman sums, and so it's there that when we enter, and there is a, and then there is a double Q van der Corput which we can do, and with Will, okay, so we can improve our previous result with something harder. And
further questions? Okay, so let's break for lunch, and let's thank Philippe again. Let's resume 10 minutes late, so at 1:50.